Now, the U.S. has pulled back its aid and diplomatic presence in Africa, cutting support for health, education, and development programs in many countries. Embassies are closing, and USAID is focusing only on a few strategic nations, leaving others with little or no help. Some African governments are stepping in, but many struggle with corruption and weak institutions. Now, this raises a pressing question. Can Africa use this moment to become less aid-dependent and build stronger, self-reliant systems? On the conversation today, I'm joined by Ejike Okpa. He is a global affairs analyst in Texas, USA. And we also have Alex Vines, Director of Africa Program, Chatham House in South Africa, Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen, on the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I'm actually in London.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. All right, so let me begin with Vines. Mr. Vines, aside the 90-day pause on all U.S. development aid, over 90% of USAID contracts have also been slated for termination. And reports also say that, there are plans to close 10 embassies, 17 consulates, including posts in Eritrea, Gambia, and also Cameroon. So what impact do you anticipate on bilateral diplomacy and crisis response with this?
Well, this is not good news. African countries at a bilateral level, but also at a continental level through the African Union, need dependable, predictable partners. And this is not about predictability or dependability at all. And so the rowing back of and cutting of embassies, the 10 embassies that you've mentioned, 17 consulates, if that is the plan, is very concerning. I'm also alarmed to see reports, although the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs of the United States, Marco Rubio, says it's not correct, but there was a leaked document going around Washington earlier this week that talked about that the U.S. State Department, their foreign ministry, might have its Bureau of African Affairs, so the department focused on Africa being abolished, and that Africa would just be covered through a special envoy out of the White House. We'll have to see, but what is clear is under the Trump administration, Africa is being deprioritized, and that the focus is more on what the United States is really what the Trump administration is really concerned about, which is access to Africa's strategic and critical minerals and a bit of counter-terrorism. What Africa needs is trade and investment, and it needs that way beyond the natural resource extraction vision that the Trump administration has. So what this, I think, tells us is two things. One is the importance of self-reliance, which you've mentioned, and how Africa will need to develop itself. It's already got the vision of the African Free Continental Trade Area, the AFCTA. That's one. And secondly, the importance of multipolarity, so that countries like Nigeria have multiple partnerships, and that Nigeria builds deeper relations with other parts of the world, be they China, be they Europe, be they countries in Asia, and so on. But be less reliant on the United States.
Okay. Now let's speak to Mr. Okpa on this. You heard what Mr. Vines actually had to say, and he did talk about, a memo going around in the White House that the department focusing on Africa will be abolished. Mr. Okpa, what can you say about this, and also what other gaps have emerged due to the 90 days pause, the termination of contracts, and also the plan to close down embassies?
Well, yeah, thank you for having me. I listened to what he said, and I don't agree with some of it. America doesn't owe any country an embassy. The embassy has to be relevant to American goals and objectives, and the countries that have those embassies also have to see the need to have a relationship with America. This is just like a case of a mother and a baby. At some point, you have to wean the baby from the breast milk. Africa has been unable to wean itself from either going to Europe or going to America. Since independence, how many African countries have been able to grow up apart from running to England or running to America and asking for something that by now they should be able to do. So I think what Trump is doing or Trump has done is to send that signal. Begin to look inwards. Africa is a billion plus. Population of Africa is bigger than all the Western European countries added together. Why are you going back to them? This so-called Chatham House. Anytime Nigerian presidents, there's a president, they go over there to go and listen. How many British prime ministers, when they run for office, come to Africa to listen? So the divorce is fine. We'll go build a new relationship and show whomever was your former colonial master that you can do this by yourself. In America, we were colonized by Britain. But you know what? We changed a whole lot of things. They drive on the left-hand side of the road, we drive on the right-hand side. The way we flip our switch for power is different, just to show them that, hey, we don't have to deal with you. We deal with you on our terms. But the African countries haven't been able to do it. But all the resources you have is education your own native people have gotten from institutions in those countries. But each time you run to them, so what I'm saying is that Trump is showing up and saying, hey, look inwards. If you want to deal with America, come along. We'll talk with you. We'll listen to you. If there is a meeting of interest based on what you want and what we want, then we relate. But I don't think there's need for America to have embassies in even inconsequential countries. And then when those people come to America, they work against America. Again, at some point, every parent has to look at the kids, or the kids look at the parents. Some people have to grow up. Africa has to grow up. This is an opportunity for them to do it. Trade with yourselves. Africa is the least continent that trades with itself. Yes, they have done the African Trade Agreement or African Trade Regions, but how much trade is being going on with that? We have to look at the numbers. You don't have to send anything to Europe or America that your own people need. If it's technology, then invite the capable hands to help you develop it. But I am tired as a native African who is not an American by choice to always look at African leaders go before the world and look like children. If China invites them, they go. If Britain invites them to go, anywhere they invite, they just go like people going for a birthday party. It is not what it is. This is about competition. If you're not able to compete, stay aside and then deal with whatever anybody else does to you. Well, what's the interest in China? How many Africans have gone to school in China or India or Pakistan or Lebanon? These countries that come to Nigeria, Africa, and run circles around Nigerians. Who is the white man? Let me use that phrase. Who is the white man? What school has they gone to come over there and tell you what to do? There's no university in the world an African and Nigerian hasn't graduated. Oftentimes, superior academic performance, but yet you can solve your own problem. Is it the currency? Is it diplomacy? Is it trade? Those are the things that matter. It's not the fanfare. It's not your president run to these countries every little opportunity they get, and sometimes they are not even recognized at that. Wasn't Tinubu in France? While Tinubu was in France, Macron was in Egypt. Just think about that. I mean, can an American president be in Nigeria and the Tinubu is somewhere else? Please.
Yes, Mr. Okpa, you did say that, the U.S. doesn't owe any African country or anyone an embassy. Let's pass this question to Mr. Vines. Aside the embassies and all that, an internal memo, State Department memo also proposes cutting 132 bureaus and 700 positions, dissolving offices for global criminal justice and democracy and also human rights. Mr. Vines, how will this dismantling affect U.S. advocacy on governance issues?
I mean, I disagree, and I think your previous speaker is a bit ungracious to say that Eritrea or Zambia is an inconsequential country. My view is that every single country in Africa, every single one, 55 countries, is equally important, just like Ireland or the United Kingdom or Vietnam or Uruguay in South America. So I think it's about diplomacy, it's about mutual respect, about the importance of maintaining diplomatic missions and being able to communicate from one government to another. So that's about equality, I think. And I find it rather arrogant to suggest that you do not need to maintain cordial diplomatic relations with global partners. In terms of the proposals that are emerging out of the White House,
State Department.
I do think that it's very worrying that the one continent in the world that is earmarked for significant downgrading, cutting of embassies, cutting of programs, cutting of consulates is Africa. So why is it that the Trump administration regards the African continent, a continent of 55 countries, with the largest, fastest growing population in the world? I mean, Nigeria will be the third largest country in the world by population by 2050. And yet it is the continent that is being earmarked for significant retreat of the United States. I'm puzzled because I see the African continent as a continent of the future, and I would like to see African ideas, African solutions to global problems, Africa being mainstreamed. And instead, out of the United States with the Trump administration, you seem to have a very different vision. In fact, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, cancelled his first trip to Africa this week. He was meant to be visiting Kenya and Ethiopia. So this is very puzzling to me that the United States is looking at the African continent in this manner.
Okay. Now, still on you, Mr. Vance. Mr. Okpa also did talk about, it being a competition, with China. And we know that right now, when it comes to China and Africa, China has pledged $51 billion in new funding to Africa. Now, what does this tell us, about the shifting balance of influence as U.S. diplomatic footprint contracts?
Well, I mean, China's investments in Africa peaked in 2017. They have declined since then, but what we are seeing is multipolarity kicking in. So you have, for example, the United Arab Emirates, Gulf states, much more significantly involved in the African continent than they were previously, and the UAE will this year be the largest foreign direct investor in the African continent. So that should be welcome because as we've already discussed, you do have the African Free Continental Trade Area, but it isn't running yet. There's progress between in some of the regional economic communities, but not at a continental level. And foreign direct investment is not enough to get the sort of economic growth that Africa needs to create opportunity and wealth for its growing population. I mean, the IMF quarterly review yesterday that was published globally, when it looks at Africa, it's projecting a slight downgrading for 2025 from 3.8% growth from what was last year 4.0%. So this is still not enough to catch up with the demographic dividend that the African continent has. So it shouldn't be seen as zero sum. My own view is that Africa should attract all the investment that it can, but that it needs to be better equipped to negotiate and handle that on its own terms. So what I fully agree with is, for example, the extraction of Africa's minerals, that there needs to be value addition. What I'm saying is there needs to be processing of those minerals. It's like Nigeria. Why has it taken so long for Nigeria to develop its own refinery? Finally, you got the Dangote refinery, but it's taken so long. Previously, refined oil products needed to be imported into Nigeria, which the answer, I think, lies in the political economy that flourished in Nigeria until recently in this regard. So Africa needs to industrialize, and it certainly needs to provide to process its own raw materials and export them, and that is, I think, something that African governments can do. They can insist on that.
All right, now let's hear, from Mr. Okpa, still on China. Chinese lenders, we know they also approved $4.61 billion in loans to Africa last year. Are there any emerging partnerships beyond China and the U.S. that you are seeing develop?
Look, this conversation is very interesting, and I have very different views from Mr. Vine because, again, America never colonized any African country. So the Britain that did it, let him tell me one African country that has succeeded because of British influence. Don't sit on the side and point fingers. Diplomatic relationship has to be mutual. The two partners have to want it. If one doesn't want it, it does not exist. And what the Trump administration has said is that they're going to have envoys. Okay, it doesn't mean they're going to shut down everything. Maybe this is an opportunity for each African country that think they have something to gain from being in partnership with America to now develop that relationship and stick to it. When you talk about 54 African countries, it's too big, it's too broad. You have to have countries within Africa that have significant impact. Nigeria hasn't done that. Kenya hasn't done that. Ghana hasn't done that. Zambia hasn't done that. South Africa hasn't done that. So where are you so much waiting for somebody else to come and clean your house? What Mr. Vani said about industrialization has been in economics books before any one of us was born. So how come then, again, the question is how come when Africans go to school in Oxford, Harvard, and whatever the premier universities are, and they go home and they cannot deliver? Is any of the British prime ministers, or is there any education they have better than the one most Nigerians have? Why are you coddling them? Why are you chasing them? Sometimes you have to stand up and tell the guy who wants to colonize you that I'm not going to do it your way and watch me do it. If Africans don't have that mentality, they're not going to get anywhere. Okay, you accepted about $51 billion of China money in Africa. Divided by the 55 countries, that means no country is even getting $1 billion. You can never borrow yourself into prosperity depending on what you're going to get from outside. The money Africans are asking America or UK or China to give them, did God wire it to them? They created their own currencies and they make it work for them. The value of your currency is a sovereign right. You are entitled to it. You don't have to devalue it. When I left Nigeria for America, Naira was stronger than the dollar. That was 37 or 38 years ago. Look at it today. In 1987, if you had 1 million Naira, you almost had $2 million. If you're a financial modeler, how can it be that in 38 years, 1 million Naira is now worth $650? And you're going to hear from people like Mr. Vine who think, the white man is the person who's going to deliver Africa. Africa has to deliver themselves. And you have to regionalize your influence. You cannot all 55 or 54 African countries at one time. Begin to develop regional powerhouses that can create that influence. Not everybody in Europe is part of the European Union. They chose who they want to be, and they set conditions for them to be members. So don't come to Africa and tell us what you don't know. You're not a native African. No matter how it is you feel about Africa, you have to have the African mentality and spirit to understand that until you internalize your own power, you cannot depend on the outside person to do it. Every country in the world has had some colonization at some point in their history. But look at what they have done. So why is it in 21st century with all the resources, every country, the Africans shouldn't confuse themselves that they have anything that nobody
all right,
has.
Mr. Ejike.
No, hold on a second. This is very important because I don't appreciate when people that Mr. Vine come in and they think they have the answer.
It's all right. Can we please just focus?
Hold on a second. African relationship has to be relevant for Africa. It has to be relevant for Africa. Just like when you go out to become a partner or friend, that thing has to benefit you. If it's a one-way traffic, it's not a relationship. It's a master-servant issue. So what I'm saying is Africans, this is an opportunity for them to now look up to their currency, look at the interest rate that they're charging their people when they lend them money, and even do a weighted average. Why are you lending money to people at 20-30% and you think it's going to? Any foreign direct investment is going to do that for Africa because you still have to convert the local currency and pay them back in pound, euro,
absolutely
or dollar.
Understood, Mr. Ejike. Africa needs to, work for themselves and become self-dependent and also self-reliant. Now let's move away from that and talk about something, what we're actually discussing right now. Let's focus on AGOA for a brief moment, and I would like to come to you, Mr. Vines, on that, because so many analysts have actually said that AGOA is a done deal and it will or might not be renewed. Now, we've also heard that Congress has been urged to update AGOA ahead of its September 2025 expiry. Now, what policy levers, could Congress and the administration pull to narrow the U.S.-China trade gap?
Well, I regard AGOA as successful for a small number of African countries. It has really stimulated industrial capacity, particularly in the textile sector. So for your viewers, let's just remind ourselves that about 35 African countries are beneficiaries of AGOA, which is a duty-free preference program that's been offered to African countries accessing US markets since 2000. As you mentioned, AGOA expires in September 2025, but I think we can expect that AGOA will be renewed, but it will be smaller, and bigger economies like South Africa are likely to be excluded, especially given the diplomatic tensions that we see with the US. The imposition of tariffs by the Trump administration particularly knocked a number of the AGOA countries, so some of the smallest, most vulnerable African countries for their economies, such as Lesotho and Madagascar, were badly impacted by the tariffs. So that's kind of neutralized the benefits that they had obtained from AGOA. And that will impact and bring them lower economic growth for those economies. In fact, if you read the IMF quarterly forecast, that they already indicate kind of downgrading of the economic possibilities for those countries. I'm hopeful for AGOA, but not for South Africa. But I do think the Trump administration will try and repurpose AGOA to be more beneficial for the United States than it was in its original version created in 2000.
Okay, now still on you, Mr. Vines, before we come to you, Mr. Okpa. Mr. Vines, what about the steep U.S. tariffs, that almost every country is actually, is actually experiencing right now, the steep U.S. tariffs that, when it comes to Africa, up to 50% has been placed on goods from Lesotho. These are all compounding economic stress. Is it possible for local exports to adjust? And also, do you think that this would undermine, African exports resilience or African trade resilience?
So many African countries are not particularly impacted by the Trump tariffs because what they do export, and this is the paradox, are raw materials and things that the United States wants. And what they don't do is provide the value addition, which actually would provide more training, more jobs, more opportunity. So it's a paradox that actually the United States, in a way, is trying to incentivize the export of raw materials, including kind of critical and strategic minerals to it, not ones that have already been processed. So who's the hit list that have already been impacted by the tariffs? Well, they're mostly North African and Southern African countries. Those are actually, many of them, that have industrialized, as I've mentioned already, that they have, for example, viable, effective textile industries. And so you mentioned Lesotho, but Botswana, Madagascar, Mauritius, and South Africa are added to that particular list. So those are the most impacted. And then there are other countries that the United States is actually deepening its diplomatic and trade engagements with, that have also been impacted by higher tariffs initially, although they may kind of come down now, is a good example of that. So we'll have to see how this develops. The country that has hit the headlines was Lesotho, and I think it was targeted because of its significant trade imbalance, because Lesotho exports, high quality designer clothing, including jeans to the United States, but it hardly imports anything from the United States. And so they just looked at those trade figures and slapped on this massive tariff on this small landlocked country in southern Africa.
Oh, okay. Now let's quickly wrap up with Mr. Okpa. Now, while we hear your final thoughts, something the UN Secretary, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, he urged additional exemptions, for the most vulnerable. That's talking about, the freezers and all that. Are there formal channels that the UN and also non-governmental organizations, what formal channels do they have to negotiate relief from the freeze? Because as it is, we hear that it has affected HIV/AIDS medication. It has affected, AIDS when it comes to humanitarian aid in Ethiopia for those who are in need of food and the likes.
Look, this is a very interesting conversation, and your questions are pointed. Look, before we started doing international trade, people traded village by village and then, region by region, because at the time we were limited by transportation infrastructure. But now that we have airplanes and rails and ships and stuff, we are able to go anywhere. But remember, trade has to be relevant to the importer and exporter. You talk about the sort of what is the value of the change they sent to America. We have to talk numbers. And if you look at it, it's not even $1 billion. It's unfortunate that they are being impacted. But that's where you go back to your economic table and see what it is, what policies you have to change, what other countries around you can sell the same thing to. You talk about AGOA. Nobody talks about the free trade agreement. Only Morocco has a free trade agreement with America. And the reason for that is Morocco was the first the first African country to recognize America as a nation. And they have it. During Obama, I approached Obama's trade representative, who was the former mayor of Dallas. I said, can Obama find a group of African countries and give them a regional trade agreement? The trade agreement, FTA, is far better than AGOA. AGOA is just like a default thing. Let's just, appease these people. What most people don't understand, you have to engage the Americans. When Obama announced the Power Africa initiative, many African countries jump up and down, but they never followed up. They never, nobody from the 5 countries that were mentioned in that initiative, rather than say, okay, Mr. President, what are we going to do? There was no money behind it. But so while you are being constantly denied opportunity, you are denying yourself. The African, the Black mentality, just like you go to the Caribbean, you go to anywhere is a high concentration of Black people, they haven't figured out how to be a member of the world in a respectable manner. Why should you go to IMF? Why should you go to the World Bank? Create your own regional currency power and use it, and never agree to devaluation when it's going to have a detrimental issue on you. Self-preservation is the first order of business. And that starts with the individual as well as the country. The African leaders and their mentality and culture of chasing everybody while nobody's chasing them has devalued the continent. Remember when we were colonized, the pound had the same value in every country. Then when Africans started becoming independent, the Exchequer and the British government figured out they cannot sustain themselves, and they started the devaluation formula. They started messing with people's currency, and Africans haven't come back and said, to hell with that. We're not going to deal with you. And the only country that said that to UK and survived was Singapore. That is why today Singapore has the highest per capita of any Commonwealth nation, even higher than that of England. Okay. So you got to get to where somebody has stepped on you, and then you're going to say, you're not going to do it again. That's all I'm saying. I don't care about what comes out of the Chatham House, or I don't care what comes out of Washington, D.C. If you come into my home and try to marginalize me, I am going to stand up to you. Because the money you're asking these people, it was not wired. It's, hold on a second, wired by God. UN does not influence America. We don't care what they say. America is still an independent sovereign nation, and if we decide to do something, we're going to do it regardless of what the UN is thinking.
Mr. Okpa, well, sadly we'll have to wrap up here, but thank you so much, Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst in Texas, USA, and also Alex Vines, Director of Africa Program, Chatham House in the UK, for joining us and speaking to us on this.